few nations can boast of the scenic splendor of the United States. A richness of diversity, protected and preserved forever in America's national parks. From the great rookery of Everglades in Florida to the glacier-clad peaks of Washington, from the soaring redwoods in California to the historic plains of the Badlands in South Dakota, from the towering walls of Zion in Utah to the steaming geysers of Yellowstone in Wyoming. Across the breadth of the United States, we'll explore the history and beauty of 20 parks in 5 regions: the East Coast, the Central States, the Rocky Mountains, the American Southwest, and the Pacific Northwest. In this 2-part series, a look at America as it was in the past, a vast, unspoiled wilderness, now embraced in its greatest treasures, America's national parks. During and after the conquering of a continent, poets and philosophers, Emerson, Bryant, Thoreau, saw beauty in the natural world. Artists through the decades have portrayed their wonders. Their cry to preserve this landscape bore fruit with the establishment of the world's first national park, Yellowstone, in 1872. Today, that legacy lives on in the most extensive park system in the world. As the American philosopher Henry David Thoreau stated, "In wilderness is the preservation of the world." Our exploration in Part 1 begins on the densely populated eastern section of the United States. Everglades National Park, a subtropical wilderness in Florida. Also in Florida, Biscayne National Park, America's only underwater national park, home to a teeming coral reef. The Great Smokies National Park, a densely wooded Appalachian highland astride the border of Tennessee and North Carolina. And Shenandoah National Park, a restored wilderness in Virginia. At Shenandoah National Park, a thin ribbon of highway meanders down the back of the Appalachian Mountains, the Skyline Drive. To the east, the Piedmont. To the west, the Shenandoah Valley. Shenandoah is a story of man's relationship to the land and his impact on it. Native Americans used the land lightly. Their fires may have created the open expanse we call Big Meadow. Here they hunted white-tailed deer, which still roam and enjoy the lush growth of the area. In the 1800s, settlers occupied the area, followed by miners, tree cutters, and hill farmers. Eroded and devastated by generations of use, the land was worn out. Unlike Western parks, which were created out of existing federal lands, this park was purchased by the people and the state of Virginia, then presented to the U.S. government. President Franklin D. Roosevelt dedicated the park in 1936.
And so, my friends, I now take great pleasure in dedicating Shenandoah National Park, of dedicating it to this and to succeeding generations of Americans for the recreation and for the recreation which we find here.
The Civilian Conservation Corps worked to restore the land and build recreational facilities throughout the park. In 1939, Skyline Drive was completed, the same drive that millions enjoy today. It runs 105 miles down the spine of the Blue Ridge. Off each side of the ridge, trails lead into forests punctuated with the sound of brooks, streams, cascades, and waterfalls. Today, the land has healed. The ancient granite and metamorphic lava, in some areas over 1 billion years old, is covered with a beautiful, recycled wilderness. The perpetually clinging mists and fog give a smoky appearance to this region, the namesake of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The slopes of these low, ancient mountains are covered with more types of trees than all of Europe. Over 3/4 of the park is wilderness, with over 800 miles of trails. The survival of this wilderness land is remarkable. There are 2 stories here. One, the story of the land, and the other, the story of the people who lived here. Within the park are open fields, pioneer homesteads, and little frame churches, such as at Cades Cove, where the mountain people lived and worshipped. When they died, they were laid to rest in the church graveyards. A persistent people, through determination, they carved out a way of life still followed by hill people in Appalachia. While the Indians had little impact on the land, the newcomers changed it. In the early 19th century, the forest was vanishing. Agriculture, logging, and mining all but ruined the land. Yet, remarkably, over 40% of the original forest in the park is uncut and pristine, much as the Cherokee Indians knew the land. Today, the pioneers are gone, the wagon trains silent, replaced by modern-day travelers in search of a wilderness experience. Each year, they come in increasing numbers, over 10 million of them. Every car must cross the 2-lane mountain road between Gatlinburg and Cherokee. This flood of visitors presents a challenge to the National Park Service, for it must balance the need to see and the need of the land to be preserved. The gray, misty mountains of the east have been here, according to geologists, for 500 million years. They are some of the oldest highlands on Earth. They'll remain and survive the onslaught of 20th century man. In contrast to the rugged mountains of the Smokies are the flatlands of Everglades National Park in Florida, the largest subtropical wilderness in America. Water is the lifeblood of the Everglades. A slow-moving river, 50 miles wide and 6 inches deep, flows southward from Lake Okeechobee to the Gulf of Mexico. Covered in a sea of sawgrass, the Native Americans call the area Paheoki, which means river of grass. The climate is relatively warm the year round, with mild, dry winters, rare frosts, and usually wet summers. Moving across this flat land, where the horizon stretches out to meet the sky, one discovers forests, glades, ponds, and hummocks. This complex ecosystem is a paradise for birds. James Audubon, the first of many naturalists, and millions of subsequent bird lovers have thrilled to this ongoing show. This anhinga must dry its wings after flight, for it lacks oils needed to resist waterlogged feathers. A graceful heron carefully stalks a small fish. Walking the popular Anhinga Trail is an invitation to discover an abundance of wildlife. A very important part of this complex ecosystem, the alligator almost lost its battle with hunters, but protected since the 1960s, the alligator populations have recovered dramatically. The preservation of wildlife is a continuing challenge facing the Everglades. Another concern is the dredging and diversion of the fresh water sources of the Everglades. The Everglades ecosystem is dependent on water, a resource that is shared with an urban population of over 3 million and a large agriculture industry. In the Everglades, life hangs in the balance. But for now, as they have for eons, flocks of birds cross the evening sky in waves. There's another exception to the national park wilderness. Miami is a winter free-for-all. Beaches, races, the unofficial capital of Latin America. But just 30 miles from downtown along Florida's southeast shoreline lies Biscayne National Park. Extending into the Atlantic from the mangrove forests of the mainland is a chain of emerald islands. They're the immediately visible sights of Biscayne. Hardwood hammocks and spidery-legged mangroves provide a nursery for marine life and give sanctuary to thousands upon thousands of coastal birds. These inviting waters, sky blue, aquamarine, have known a measure of blood slick. Once these were pirate waters, bloody waters, English sea dogs lying in ambush for Spanish galleons laden with gold. Actually, it wasn't until the 1920s that the U.S. Navy finally rid the Florida Keys of high seas banditry. And beneath Biscayne's waters, the real treasure of the park is taken in. 95% of this park is underwater. These are some of the true treasures of Biscayne, and they're there for everyone. Near the top and the bottom of the central states are two parks which characterize the variety found in America's national parks. Badlands National Park, the arid South Dakota land of the bison and home to ancient fossils. And Hot Springs National Park in Arkansas, where a natural hot springs offers history and mineral baths. Hot Springs, smallest of the national parks. It spreads over some blocks of a bustling little Arkansas city and the forest fringing it. But the hot springs came first. The city grew up around them. Thousands of years ago, rainwater started seeping into porous rock and soil to depths of 4,000 feet. Heated in the cauldron of the Earth's innards, these waters began percolating back to the surface with a temperature of 143 degrees Fahrenheit. Early Indians, the first to bathe here, believed that these springs held a great spirit who heated the waters with his breath. The first European to bathe in these springs was Hernando de Soto, the explorer who discovered Florida for Spain. That was back in 1541. If he really was the first, he had no idea what he was starting. President Thomas Jefferson acquired the springs with the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. He sent scientists who came back glowing. This encouraged health seekers to take the waters. In 1832, President Andrew Jackson set aside Hot Springs as a special reservation. That was 40 years before Yellowstone. Then in 1921, Hot Springs, Arkansas, the great American spa, was designated a national park. Certainly one of the most accessible, and the only national park in the United States that can boast a bathhouse row as one of its attractions. The list of notables who've bathed here reads like a who's who of what might seem a more innocent age. John L. Sullivan, the boxer. Billy Sunday, the evangelist. Heavyweight champion Jack Dempsey. And Harry, the buck stops here, Truman. Are the steaming waters from these 47 springs, 850,000 gallons every day, the elixir of health and longevity they were once claimed to be? The park makes no such claims. Still, a trip to Hot Springs can add to one's feeling of well-being. And it's fun to sip the champagne of pure waters and then get into a bath with history. Wind ripples the grass here in Badlands National Park. Through the flats of the upper prairies, over the floodplain of the White River, lashing at the Badlands wall. In a landscape ever shaped and reshaped by erosion. The Badlands stretch along the White River for 100 miles. Why are these lands dubbed bad? You need only look off the established trail to find out. This terrain is torturous to travel over. Even the Sioux called it Makosika, meaning land bad. Fortunately for visitors, the park's trails are easily negotiated and points of interest well organized, such as the display of the fossilized remains of hundreds of ancient animals from Oligocene times. Some 200 years ago, these grasslands were dense with bison, the American buffalo. Then an estimated 60 million of them roamed the North American plains. For centuries, Plains Indians hunted them. Before the coming of the Spanish, they'd stampede them over cliffs as one way of downing them. With the Spanish explorers came horses, horses for trade, horses that broke away and reverted to a wild state. The Plains tribes soon learned to master the animal. Their braves became skilled and daring riders. Now they hunted buffalo on horseback. The buffalo provided everything they needed: food, hides for robes, clothes, drumheads, covering for their teepees, sinew for bowstrings, hair for rope, horn for cooking utensils. Clearly, the buffalo sustained their very existence. Indian hunters coexisted with the buffalo. White hunters almost annihilated it. At first for hides, then for the tongues, which were considered a table delicacy, and then it seems to wipe out the buffalo as a food source so as to starve the Indians into submission. Teddy Roosevelt once commented sadly, "Never before were so many large wild animals of one species slain in so short a space of time." Scattered across the backbone of the continent are a series of high western parks. Rocky Mountain National Park, preserving some of Colorado's high country. Grand Teton National Park, where jagged peaks spear the Wyoming sky. Also in Wyoming, Yellowstone National Park, America's first national park. Montana's Glacier National Park, called the crown of the continent. Where the Rocky Mountains touch the Canadian border, the land is rugged, high, and spectacular. Two parks bridge two nations, Waterton Lakes National Park in Canada and Glacier National Park in the United States. Combined as the Waterton Glacier International Peace Park, it symbolizes the bond between the two nations. Like many parks in the West, the move to create Glacier National Park was encouraged by the railroads. They promoted travel to the parks. The Great Northern Railroad built the well-known Many Glacier Lodge in 1917. It was one of a series of lodges and facilities constructed in the park. But it was a road, not the railroad, that opened Glacier to millions of people. The gear-grinding, heart-wrenching, and constantly curving Going to the Sun Road. An engineering masterpiece in the 30s, it crosses Logan Pass. A road with more than sweeping vistas, it's an open text for the student of natural history. Glacier is a meeting place of climatic and vegetation zones. To the west, forests which resemble those of the Pacific Northwest. In the center, the high alpine tundra. And to the east, the prairie grasslands. They call it Glacier, but there are only a few, less than 50, true glaciers in the park. The end of the Ice Age 10,000 years ago marked the retreat of the great glaciers, but their impact on some of the oldest sedimentary rock in the world is highly visible. Across this diverse landscape, many species of wildlife occupy special niches. This is America's wilderness, 1,000,000 wild acres. 700 miles of trails cross the deep valleys, skirt dark lakes, and border vibrant meadows. Every turn of the trail takes the traveler deeper into the wilderness. Even a day hike a few miles off a main road evokes a special sense of tranquility and peace. One of the best-loved parks in the United States is Yellowstone. On the high Yellowstone Plateau is the world's largest geothermal area. It includes half of the world's geysers. In the 19th century, Western trappers told stories of spouting columns of water 60 feet high and bubbling hot springs of iridescent green and gold. Jim Bridger called it a place where hell bubbled up. In the 1870s, expeditions verified these tall tales, and a movement began to protect these natural wonders. And in 1872, Yellowstone became America's first national park. Why is there such diversity of geothermal activity at Yellowstone? One reason, under this ancient caldera, the Earth's molten core, the magma, is very close to the surface, about 2 miles, instead of the usual 15 miles. Thermal activity results when water seeping down into the fractured volcanic crust of the plateau reaches these hot rocks. It boils. Under extreme pressure, the superheated water seeks a way out. We see it as steam vents, geysers, mud volcanoes, or bubbling hot springs. There are over 10,000 geothermal features in the park. But all of Yellowstone is not a bubbling cauldron. The Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone is one of the park's most impressive features. 2 great waterfalls add to the majesty of the canyon region. The upper falls sends the Yellowstone River into a short, narrow channel of a mile or so, and then the cold waters of the Yellowstone cascade over the lower falls in a thundering drop twice the height of Niagara. On the high plateau, man is a visitor. The land belongs to the wild animals. The largest member of the deer family, moose, favor marshy meadows. One of the more common animals is the elk, often seen in meadows along the roads. Yellowstone National Park is the greatest wildlife sanctuary in the United States outside of Alaska. Winter in Yellowstone is a hard season for wildlife. An icy cold grips the land in freezing embrace. Some animals move to lower elevations, others hibernate, but some must forage for meager fare hidden beneath the snow. The buffalo is well adapted to survive the harsh winters. Around the geothermal features, the ground is warm and bare, allowing limited foraging. A few adventurous snowmobilers and cross-country skiers brave the cold to enjoy a different Yellowstone, one of serene beauty, a winter wonderland. The Yellowstone landscape may seem stable, permanent, but nature is always evolving. In 1988, a series of major wildfires swept across the Yellowstone. The news media described it as a disaster, but few animals died. The burned areas are recovering. New habitats are opening. Yellowstone survived. Historically, fire has been a natural agent of change in Yellowstone. Perhaps the greatest danger from the fire came to buildings such as the Old Faithful Inn, one of the largest log buildings in the world. But the inn, like most buildings in the park, was saved by firefighters. Nearby, the symbol of this park, Old Faithful, lives up to its name with a spectacular show which is reasonably faithful. The eruption is intermittent, between 30 to 90 minutes apart, but averaging every 75 minutes. Another impressive sight is Mammoth Hot Springs, where water trickles down row after row of delicately colored terraces of travertine. The terrace rims grow upward, eventually breaking, and the waters flow down and out to form new terraces. The colors in the pools come from algae. Yellowstone is more than scenic wonders. It's a monument to the far-sighted conservationists who preserved a primitive bit of America, then went on to develop a philosophy that spread to other parts of the world. As Yellowstone is broad and expansive, the Grand Teton National Park is compact. Totaling less than 40 miles in length, the Tetons are a dramatic mountain range. From the valley floor on the Jackson Hole side, the mountains rise abruptly 7,000 feet. This jagged outline of cirques, horns, and knife-edged ridges reach their highest point at the 13,770-foot summit of the Grand Teton. Their dramatic nature is enhanced by the lack of foothills. These ancient rocks, once a seabed, are very old, but in geologic terms, the mountain range is very young. It's very similar to the Sierra Nevada range in California. Both are fault block mountains with sloping west sides and steep east sides. Today's glaciers are remnants of the great glaciers of the ice ages. Now, the dominant force is water, but in the absence of the glacier, the visitor can observe how ice shaped the land. For what was once hidden under ice is now revealed. In 1807, John Coulter left the Lewis and Clark expedition to explore on his own, and was probably the first white man to view the range. In 1929, the Grand Teton Park was established. Geology and wildlife are the strengths of this park. Wilderness travelers have the best opportunity to see wildlife. Driving through the park offers glimpses of moose and other species. This range is one of the premier mountaineering centers in the United States. The last two peaks in this range were not climbed until 1930. Climbing the Tetons is not for the novice, as many climbers consider them rivals of the Alps. No previous experience is required for a commercial trip down the Snake River, which meanders through the park, but it is not without danger. The Rockefeller Parkway presents classic views of the mountains and the Snake River that have become favorites with photographers from around the world. Each passing hour offers light changes from somber to joyful. If any one park is a symbol of the great American outdoors, it must be the Rocky Mountain National Park. This high land, with 18 peaks over 13,000 feet, sits astride the Continental Divide. The most lofty is Long's Peak, whose summit rises to 14,255 feet. Below it are quiet lakes, bubbling streams, flower-laden meadows, and rocky canyons. The park is only 2 hours from Denver, and each year 3 million people visit the park. Only its ruggedness prevents it from being overrun with people. Much of its greatness can be viewed from Trail Ridge Road, which reaches an altitude of 12,183 feet and is above tree line for 11 miles, making it the highest through road in North America. It makes the alpine tundra accessible to all. The few small glaciers that remain in the park are reminders that glaciation formed this park. There are U-shaped valleys and great rock amphitheaters and moraines. Cool mountain lakes and streams provide a place for wildlife to drink and visitors to enjoy the beauty. America's national parks have stood the test of time because they're protected havens in a diminishing natural world. They stand as a testament to the will of a people who feel that America's vast diversity and beauty must be preserved for future generations. Splendid examples of what once was. In the second part of the series, our exploration will move westward to explore the awesome sights that greeted an expanding America as we explore the Southwest and the Pacific Northwest, including California.